There is a specific silence surrounding people who haven't had their first kiss yet. It's not a silence imposed from outside, but one built from within. Society treats the first kiss as a simple, almost trivial rite, something that just happens. But when it doesn't happen at the expected time, this void begins to gain psychological weight. Machiavelli would observe that the problem lies not in the absence of the kiss itself, but in the meaning the mind begins to attribute to that absence. For these individuals, the first kiss ceases to be merely an emotional experience and transforms into a symbol. It comes to represent validation, belonging, normalcy, personal worth. The mind begins to measure its own existence based on something that hasn't yet occurred. And when identity starts to be built around the not yet, a particular type of internal tension arises, the constant feeling of being behind the rest of the world. The first psychological mechanism to emerge is silent comparison. Friends, colleagues, other stories, everything turns into a mirror. Every casual account becomes a reminder, not necessarily of envy, but of difference. The person begins to ask themselves, "What's wrong with me?" This question, repeated over time, doesn't seek an answer. It constructs a narrative, and prolonged narratives shape behavior. Machiavelli would understand that when someone begins to perceive themselves as a negative exception, they start to act as such. Their posture changes, their gaze retracts, their presence becomes cautious. Not because the person wants it to, but because the body responds to the idea of inadequacy. The nervous system enters an excessive observation mode. Every social interaction becomes overanalyzed. Every gesture is calculated. And where there is constant calculation, there is a loss of spontaneity. Another crucial point is the internalization of external judgment. Even if no one is demanding it, the person begins to demand it of themselves. The first kiss transforms into a test of social, emotional, and even physical competence. Its absence starts to be experienced as a personal failure, not as a circumstance. Machiavelli knew that human beings suffer more from imagined judgments than from real attacks. The mind creates extremely severe internal tribunals. Over time, a common defense mechanism emerges: rationalization. The person begins to explain to themselves why it hasn't happened yet. It's not a priority. I'm more focused on other things. Relationships are superficial. These explanations aren't false, but they serve a clear psychological function: to protect self-esteem. Machiavelli would see this as an internal survival strategy. When something hurts, the mind creates meaning to endure it. However, this rationalization has an important side effect. While it protects, it also freezes. The person begins to shy away from situations that could lead to a kiss, not due to a lack of desire, but out of fear of confirmation. Because trying and failing would be more painful than maintaining the narrative that it's not the right time yet. The body learns to avoid emotional risk, and avoiding risk comes at a high price. Another little discussed aspect is idealization. The more the first kiss is postponed, the more it grows in the imagination. It ceases to be a simple gesture and becomes laden with expectation. It needs to be perfect, special, memorable. This idealization creates pressure, and pressure blocks action. The person doesn't want to mess up something that has been elevated to an existential milestone. Machiavelli would understand this as a classic trap. Transforming a simple act into a monumental event paralyzes. There is also the confusion between worth and experience. Many of these individuals begin to believe, even unconsciously, that the first kiss is what will make them desirable, as if desire comes after the experience, not before. This inversion is dangerous. It causes the person to place themselves in an inferior position, waiting to be validated by an external event. Machiavelli would warn that whoever conditions their self-worth on a right loses internal sovereignty. As time passes, this dynamic can lead to two opposite paths. In some, emotional withdrawal emerges. The person closes off, avoids involvement, protects themselves excessively. In others, intense anxiety arises, a silent, almost desperate rush to get this over with. Both extremes stem from the same point: the belief that there's something wrong with not having experienced that yet. Machiavelli would be direct in analyzing this stage. The problem is not the lack of the kiss, but the psychological submission to the symbol it has become. As long as the first kiss is seen as a certificate of worth, it will hold excessive power over the mind. And anything that holds excessive power over the mind governs behavior, posture, and choices. The most ironic thing is that the kiss, when it finally happens, rarely lives up to the weight placed upon it. It doesn't resolve identities, doesn't erase accumulated insecurities, doesn't redefine who the person is. But until this is understood, the mind continues to project onto the future something that needs to be reorganized in the present. This is the initial point almost no one addresses. People who haven't had their first kiss yet are not behind. They are most often trapped in a social narrative that has transformed a common experience into an existential test. And for Machiavelli, freeing oneself from this narrative has always been the first step to regaining control over oneself. Over time, this silent narrative begins to reorganize not just thoughts, but entire behaviors. The person who hasn't had their first kiss yet starts to live in a state of continuous self-observation. They are not just living interactions, they are watching themselves live. Every conversation is analyzed afterward. Every glance is reinterpreted. Every silence turns into suspicion. Machiavelli would understand this as a dangerous displacement. Attention ceases to be on the world and turns excessively inward. This excess of self-consciousness creates a psychological paradox. The more the person desires the kiss to happen, the less available they become for it to happen naturally. The body loses fluidity. Laughter comes out late. Responses are rehearsed. Presence becomes rigid, not because of a lack of interest, but because of the fear of failing at something that has been elevated to a decisive test. Machiavelli knew that nothing pushes desire away more than performance anxiety. Another common mechanism is the overinterpretation of rejection. Small frustrations, a conversation that doesn't progress, an invitation that doesn't materialize, a message that doesn't arrive, begin to be read as confirmation of inadequacy. The isolated event ceases to be circumstantial and becomes proof. The mind constructs a pattern from limited data. This always happens to me. This phrase, repeated internally, shapes future expectations, and expectations shape posture. Machiavelli would observe that human beings act according to the place they believe they occupy. When someone perceives themselves as the one who is never chosen, they begin to occupy that place even before being rejected. The body communicates insecurity before any words are spoken. Not out of moral weakness, but out of emotional learning. The mind teaches the body to protect itself from what it imagines to be inevitable. An ambiguous behavior then emerges. Desire and avoidance coexist. The person wants closeness but recoils when it gets too close. They want connection but shut down when they feel vulnerable. This back and forth creates constant internal frustration. Machiavelli would understand this as a conflict between impulse and self-preservation. Impulse pushes forward. Fear pulls back. The result is immobility. There is also the impact of digital culture. Social media amplifies this feeling of being behind. Photos, stories, constant comparisons create the illusion that everyone else has already gone through this stage, except you. The mind forgets that what is displayed is not the whole picture, only the storefront. Even so, the psychological effect is real. The person begins to feel invisible or flawed, even without concrete evidence of it. Machiavelli would say that this is the power of collective narratives when they are not questioned. Another little discussed effect is the disconnection from one's own desire. Instead of feeling attraction spontaneously, the person begins to evaluate whether they should feel something. Desire turns into an obligation. It's about time. This pressure distorts internal perception. The body ceases to be a guide and becomes something to be demanded of. Machiavelli knew that forced desires rarely produce genuine encounters. They produce tension. As time passes, some people adopt a stance of permanent observer. They become good listeners, attentive, present, but rarely put themselves at emotional risk. They wait for very clear signals from the other person before acting. They wait for guarantees before moving. The problem is that human relationships rarely offer initial guarantees. Machiavelli would say that those who demand total security before the first step tend not to move forward. There is also the fantasy of the right moment. The person believes that when it's with someone special enough, everything will flow. This idea seems romantic, but it functions as psychological postponement. It transfers responsibility from the present to an idealized future. Meanwhile, the body continues to learn to avoid, not to experience. Machiavelli would see this as a poorly calibrated strategic postponement. Another central point is the fear of exposure. The first kiss carries the feeling of being seen, evaluated, remembered. For someone who has spent years feeling out of sync with the social rhythm, this exposure seems too risky. Better not to try than to try and confirm one's own insecurities. This thought isn't cowardice, it's learned self-protection. But excessive protection also limits growth. Machiavelli would summarize this stage with clarity. When the mind transforms a simple experience into a judgment of personal worth, it creates a field of constant tension. The person doesn't suffer because they haven't kissed. They suffer because they believe it says something definitive about who they are. And as long as this belief exists, every interaction will be filtered by fear, not by curiosity. At this point, the first kiss has ceased to be an affectionate gesture. It has become a symbol of psychological liberation. And symbols, when overloaded, paralyze. For Machiavelli, the solution was never to wait for the perfect moment, but to strip the symbol of the excessive power given to it. Until that happens, the mind remains governed by an absence, and absences should not command anyone's life. When this absence continues to be the axis of identity, something deeper happens. The person begins to organize their life around what they avoid, not what they desire. Machiavelli would observe that at this stage, the first kiss is no longer just an unlived event. It is a constant reference that guides decisions, social paths, and even personality choices. The individual begins to mold themselves so as not to be exposed, not to be tested, not to be seen. From a psychological standpoint, this creates a subtle dissociation between who the person is when alone and who they become in romantic contexts. Alone, they might be intelligent, sensitive, articulate. In environments where desire could emerge, they contract. The energy shifts. The body enters defensive mode. Not because of a lack of interest, but because the symbolic risk has become too great. Machiavelli knew that when risk is perceived as a threat to identity, instinct doesn't negotiate, it blocks. A pattern of existential postponement then emerges. The person begins to think, when this happens, then I'll finally let loose. After this, I'll feel normal. The first kiss comes to be seen as a watershed moment. Before it, life seems incomplete. After it, everything would make sense. This logic creates continuous waiting. The present loses value. The future carries a promise that never arrives. Machiavelli would understand this as a serious strategic error, surrendering control of one's internal state to an uncertain external event. Another important effect is the construction of an identity based on observation, not action. The person becomes excellent at understanding others, reading signals, grasping nuances, precisely because they observe too much. But this ability comes with chronic hesitation. They know a lot but act little. Emotional knowledge doesn't convert into movement. Machiavelli would say that perception without action generates accumulated frustration. There is also the idealization of the other. The more time passes without the experience, the more the kiss needs to be with someone right, safe, special. This isn't pure romanticism, it's a defense mechanism. If it's special enough, any discomfort will be justified. The problem is that this idealization creates such a narrow filter that few people pass through it. The person doesn't consciously reject, but becomes inaccessible. Desire turns into something distant, almost abstract. On an emotional level, this generates a feeling of silent inadequacy. The person doesn't feel inferior all the time, but carries the sensation of being out of sync, as if they missed an invisible train. This feeling doesn't manifest as open despair, but as excessive caution. Machiavelli would know that prolonged caution, when not accompanied by action, becomes a comfortable prison. Another critical point is the confusion between inexperience and incapacity. The mind begins to treat the lack of experience as a structural flaw. If it hasn't happened yet, maybe I'm not cut out for it. This conclusion is false but psychologically powerful. It lowers expectations to avoid frustration. The person starts to expect little of themselves in this area, and low expectations shape outcomes. Over time, this logic can lead to two paths. In one, the person emotionally closes off and defines themselves as someone who doesn't need this. In the other, they force uncomfortable situations, trying to quickly resolve something that has accumulated for years. Both paths stem from the same error, giving excessive weight to the symbol and little value to the process. Machiavelli would understand that human experiences don't resolve identities. They merely reveal what was already there. There is also the fear of memory. The first kiss isn't just about the moment, it's about being remembered. What if I do something strange? What if it's bad? What if the other person realizes I'm inexperienced? The fear isn't of the kiss, but of the record, of the other's gaze fixed on a moment that seems definitive. Machiavelli knew that human beings fear humiliation more than rejection, and this fear silently paralyzes. At this stage, the absence has already produced a defensive personality in that specific area. Not in everything, but there. The person might be confident in work, studies, friendships, and completely blocked in affection. This creates internal confusion. Why can I succeed in everything but this? The answer lies not in a lack of worth, but in an excess of meaning attributed to a single right. Machiavelli would conclude this part with a precise observation. When a simple gesture becomes an existential test, it ceases to be a path and turns into an obstacle. The first kiss doesn't fail to happen because the person is inadequate. It fails because it has been transformed into a final judgment, and no one moves with freedom when they feel they are being judged even before acting. As long as this logic is not dismantled, the mind continues to live under the authority of something that hasn't happened yet, and allowing an absence to govern the present is one of the most silent forms of personal power loss. When this pattern prolongs, the absence ceases to be merely psychological and begins to manifest in the body. Machiavelli would observe that no idea sustained long enough remains abstract. It settles in posture, gaze, the rhythm of gestures. People who haven't had their first kiss yet often begin, without realizing it, to carry the weight of expectation in their own bodies. Body language becomes more restrained. There is less occupation of space, less spontaneity and casual touch, less tolerance for physical proximity. The body learns to maintain distance even before any explicit rejection. Not due to a lack of desire, but due to excessive anticipation. Machiavelli knew that the body is the first to adapt to the mind's narratives. If the mind says, "Be careful," the body obeys. This containment generates an cumulative effect. The person begins to feel out of the game, even before entering it. In social situations, they observe more than they participate. They laugh, converse, but maintain an invisible barrier. The other person senses this barrier even without being able to explain why. It's not coldness, it's internalized caution. And constant caution is perceived as emotional distance. Another important point is hypersensitivity to the possibility of exposure. Common situations, a party, a casual encounter, an unexpected compliment, begin to be experienced as risk scenarios. The body reacts with anticipatory tension, short breath, muscle rigidity, racing mind. Not because something bad is happening, but because it could happen. Machiavelli would understand this as being governed by the fear of the possible, not by actual harm. There is also a complicated relationship with time. Each year that passes without the first kiss increases the feeling of being behind. What was once just a curiosity turns into a silent demand. It should have happened by now. This phrase doesn't come from outside, it comes from within, and internal demands tend to be more cruel. The body feels this pressure as a diffuse urgency without clear direction. Over time, a specific type of anticipatory shame emerges. The person begins to imagine the future moment already laden with embarrassment. I'll seem inexperienced. It will be obvious. The other person will notice. This fear is not linked to the kiss itself, but to the narrative built over the years. Machiavelli knew that human beings don't fear the act, they fear the meaning they have attributed to it. This anticipatory shame creates a curious block. The person avoids situations where a kiss could happen, but suffers from avoiding them. They live in a constant internal conflict between desire and self-protection. Neither completely wins. The result is exhaustion. The mind tires, the body tires. The emotional life remains suspended, as if always about to begin, but never actually starting. Another less obvious effect is the transfer of value to other areas. Many people compensate for this absence by investing intensely in studies, work, skills, self-control. They become competent, responsible, admired. But internally, they feel that something fundamental remains unresolved. This compensation isn't negative in itself, but it can reinforce the idea that affection is a separate, inaccessible territory. Machiavelli would say that when an area of life becomes taboo, it grows in symbolic power. There is also the risk of emotional hardening. To avoid continuous frustration, the person begins to numb themselves. They no longer expect anything. They don't allow themselves to desire intensely. Desire becomes guarded, reduced, contained. This protects against pain, but also reduces vitality. The body feels this reduction as mild apathy, a sensation of always being a little disconnected. Machiavelli would observe that this hardening is not weakness. It is a poorly calibrated strategy. It protects in the short term, but impoverishes in the long term, because human relationships are not born from absolute security, but from moderate exposure. Those who completely eliminate risk also eliminate the possibility of real connection. At this stage, the first kiss is no longer just a postponed experience. It has become a symbol of everything that has been avoided: vulnerability, attempt, the possibility of error. And accumulated symbols become heavy. The more weight, the less movement. The person is not paralyzed by a lack of courage, but by an excess of meaning. Machiavelli would conclude this phase with a harsh yet precise observation. When the body learns to defend itself against something that has never happened, it begins to live in a war with the future. And no constant war is without cost. It demands energy, presence, and joy. Meanwhile, life continues to happen, not as it could, but as it is allowed. The problem, therefore, is not the absence of the kiss. It is the way this absence has been transformed into a silent judge of one's own existence. As long as this is not dismantled, any attempt to move forward will seem too threatening, and the body will continue to obey the narrative of caution. Even when desire calls for movement, there comes a moment when this absence needs to be put back in its proper place. Machiavelli would conclude this analysis not by offering solace, but by suggesting internal repositioning. Because for him, the problem was never the lack of a specific experience, but rather the symbolic power it came to exert over the mind. As long as the first kiss continues to be treated as a certificate of worth, it will continue to govern behaviors, choices, and fears. The first strategic move is to remove the kiss from the center of identity. It does not define maturity, does not determine emotional competence, does not reveal hidden worth. It is merely a gesture learned through interaction like so many others. When the mind truly understands this, not just rationally, something relaxes deeply. The body exits its state of vigilance. Expectation diminishes. Urgency loses its power. Machiavelli would say that what is treated as a test always generates anxiety. What is treated as a process generates learning. The kiss doesn't need to be good, memorable, or special. It just needs to happen as part of the human experience, not as a final judgment. As long as the person tries to get the kiss right, even before experiencing it, they prevent themselves from learning from it. Another essential point is to regain internal sovereignty. This means stopping the expectation that an external event will authorize internal feelings. Desire isn't born after the experience, it's born before. Confidence doesn't emerge after the kiss. It builds gradually, through imperfect attempts. Machiavelli knew that whoever waits for external validation to feel whole surrenders their own command. From a psychological perspective, this requires accepting the possibility of discomfort, not as punishment, but as part of the process. Discomfort doesn't indicate failure, it indicates movement. People who haven't had their first kiss yet often try to avoid any negative sensation associated with it. The problem is that avoiding discomfort also avoids growth. And emotional growth is never entirely comfortable. There is also a necessary shift in the relationship with error. Error ceases to be a threat to identity and becomes a piece of reality. A kiss can be awkward, quick, without chemistry, confusing. This says nothing definitive about who the person is. It merely says that they are learning. Machiavelli would say that those who do not tolerate small errors end up condemning themselves to great paralysis. Another fundamental adjustment is to move from observation to presence. Less analysis, more sensation. Less prediction, more contact with the moment. This doesn't mean acting impulsively, but allowing oneself to be there without a script. The body knows more than the anxious mind allows itself to admit. When the mind stops commanding everything, the body finds its own rhythm. With this, something important happens. The kiss loses symbolic weight. It ceases to be the first and becomes just a kiss. And, paradoxically, it is at this point that it becomes possible. Because nothing flows when it is overloaded with meaning. Lightness doesn't come from heroic courage, but from removing excessive importance. Machiavelli would summarize this conclusion with clarity. Whoever transforms a simple experience into an existential tribunal condemns themselves to infinite waiting. Whoever returns this experience to the realm of imperfect humanity regains movement. Power lies not in never having failed, but in not allowing the fear of failure to govern the present. In the end, the question isn't when the first kiss will happen. It's who is in command while it doesn't happen. As long as absence governs, the person protects themselves too much. When the person governs the absence, they allow themselves to live. And living doesn't demand guarantees. It demands presence. The first kiss doesn't free anyone, it just happens. What frees is removing the weight it should never have carried. When this happens, the body moves with less fear. The mind relaxes, and the moment ceases to be a threat to become just another step on the path. And Machiavelli would leave a final, silent warning. No external experience has the power to grant worth to someone who has not yet decided to recognize it within themselves. As long as that decision is not made, any milestone will seem distant. When it is made, the rest tends to happen, not as a reward but as a natural consequence of someone who has finally stopped waiting for authorization to exist.